In this episode of the Soul Method podcast, we do have some adult language. So if you have little ones around, grab your headphones now.
Life is a winding road, no telling where it goes. Driving through days and nights, won't stop for traffic light.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Soul Method podcast. My name is Joelle Fawcett, and I am your host and the founder of the Soul Method, where our mission is to be your guide to heal from the past, be at peace in the present, and create a future you love. And welcome to Season 2, Episode 5 of the Soul Method podcast, titled Chocolate or Vanilla? Choose. And okay, so this is one of those topics that I have been wanting to get into for a while now. And we had to lay the foundation first. We really had to lay the foundation for taking someone personally and for personal responsibility before we could get into this dynamic. So that is all to say, if you haven't listened to Season 1 of the podcast, where I really go into the nitty-gritty about how to engage with other people and how to essentially own your shit and how to process through that so that you can do what I'm about to talk about, definitely go ahead and do that. Because if you don't have that background and you're going into this episode without the ability to clear out your own emotional state and come to a situation from a really healthy place, this is going to be really challenging for you. Okay? So, I decided to do this episode this week because this situation came up around me twice this week. Once with my best friend and once with just an association that I have. And I was like, ooh, like, it's time. It's time to get into it. So, the situations that came up basically look like this. And I will give you details, but we're going to go big picture first because we've all been here. Literally every single person, you have been here before if you are living on this planet in the past 50 years. You've experienced this. And this is what this looks like. You do something, whatever it is, you do X, and then someone around you takes you personally. Okay, so you do something, that person takes you personally, even if what you're doing has nothing to do with them. Right? Maybe they overhear a conversation you're having. Maybe you drive your car a certain way. Maybe you order food a certain way. You sign your name a certain way. It could be anything. You do an action or say a thing. Someone around you takes you personally and makes what you did mean X to them. And then they come to you and they have an issue with what you did. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Because if you're not relating to this, you've been living under a rock for the past 10 years, right? Just log on to Facebook. Lots of examples right there, right? So they come to you and said, hey, I have a problem with what you're doing. All right. And then this is the part we've all experienced. We start to explain ourselves. We get defensive. We start to explain all the reasons why we did X. We have an emotional reaction We might get frustrated. We start defending ourselves. We start explaining ourselves away. We start justifying everything to this person who actually wasn't involved in the original situation at all. And often, these are the conversations that start at point A, right? They start here, right? And 10 minutes later, we wind up all the way around the block. And you look back and be like, how the hell did I get from here to here in a conversation about how I spoke to somebody over the phone or how I drove my car, right? How did I get that frustrated? How did I have that reaction? How did I wind up screaming or yelling? Or how did it ruin the rest of my day? When initially it was somebody who had nothing to do with the original thing, right? And somebody who probably really wasn't significant in it anyway, right? So now more often than not, these sorts of situations happen with people who we are close to, right? Because they see us interact, they see us do us. And it's a very easy situation for somebody who's close to us, maybe a family member or a friend or somebody we work with, to be like, hey, you really shouldn't be doing that, right? So here's the example from my best friend this week where he basically was, he was on the phone on customer service, and we all have had this experience where they're, if you're sitting out there and you have never been frustrated on the phone with some customer service representative, then go buy a cell phone because you clearly haven't been talking to anybody for the past 10 years. So he was speaking with somebody in customer service, and it had been, 20, 30-minute conversation. The people on the other end of the line clearly had dropped the ball. They weren't doing their job properly. And he got frustrated, and he started using words with the person on the phone, right? And then one of his family members overheard the conversation, and when he got off the phone, he's already frustrated, right? So this is like prime time for something to happen when we already have crap going on, right? So then the family member comes to him and says, you really shouldn't be talking to people like that on the phone. How would you react? In that moment, would you have the emotional space to lean into that conversation? And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back to season 1. Because honestly, I have this happen a lot in my life with my kids, right? Where I'll have a frustrating situation happen, and then my kids will be like, Mom, look at my picture. And I'm like, in the moment, it's not that other person's fault that they want something from us or need something from us, right? And when we already have all that junk stirred up, it's prime time. So the family member said, you shouldn't be doing X, Y, and Z. And immediately my best friend went into justification mode. Went into, well, this is why I did this. I don't understand how, you could be upset after all of these things, after all of this, and blah, 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 going down the rabbit hole of defending himself to his family member for the actions that he had done over the phone, right? So, prime example, and I'm sure everybody sitting out there, again, can relate to this situation where your pot is stirred up, and then suddenly somebody else either has a judgment about you, wants to chime in, or just needs something from you, like a child or a student or an innocent coworker who happened to open your office door at the wrong time, right? So what's going on here? Because there's a lot of layers. All right, now when my friend had contacted me about this situation, he was still upset and he was like, what is going on? Like, I'm really ticked off, and I know he listens to my podcast, and he was like, I know that there's layers here, and I helped him work through it. And this is what I said to him. And sometimes when you're in these moments, getting down to the bare bones and being really clear is the way that you kind of emotionally smack yourself enough to pull yourself out of the junk. Okay, and that's one of the best things about having a coach, is when you have somebody you can say, hey, 911, this is happening. I don't know how to handle it. I don't know why I'm so pissed off, but I'm ready to blow a fuse here, and I don't want to do that. And you need someone to come in and say, hey, breathe. This is what's going on. And here's the reality. In that situation, the family member, the friend, whoever it is, what's going on for you is none of their damn business. Now, if you're watching, or if you're listening to this on audio, I'm smiling when I say that. I've learned, it's kind of horrible, but I've learned that I can say just about anything if I smile. So there we go. Saying it with a smile. And whatever you choose to do in that interaction, this other person coming in, it's none of their business. It's really not. And if you've listened to the podcast, you know that in that dynamic, in that situation, if somebody has an issue with you, they need to deal with themselves. And when I say deal with themselves, what this dynamic means is that we have this habit of thinking that if we can control everyone around us as human beings, if we can control everything around us, we'll create comfort for ourselves. Like, that makes me uncomfortable, that makes me uncomfortable, that makes me uncomfortable. So you all need to change and do other things so that I can feel safe and in a happy cocoon. And we've talked about this a lot, right? That's called codependence. And unfortunately, our culture glorifies that. However, that's not a great way to lead your life, because it essentially gives all of your power to all of those people around you, right? Then your peace and your sense of groundedness and fulfillment is completely reliant on the actions of these other people around you instead of you. So you want more on that, listen to season 1 of the podcast. Now, the second piece of this is the defensiveness. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, we live in a culture today where we have made a habit of being offended by everyone around us. You don't have to look far to find that. And, whether somebody is offended by your personal belief system, whether somebody is offended by the things you put on your body or don't put on your body, the things you do or do not put on your lawn, the button you press when you go to the voting polls, the type of car you drive, like there's an endless amount of reasons that we as a society have decided to become offended by each other. And it's become this situation of cultural codependence where it's like, hey, I need all of you to be okay with who I am and treat me this delicate way or not say these things so that I can be validated in my own identity. And now, anybody who goes against that culture or just says the thing or makes the joke are coined as insensitive Nazis, something like that, right? So, now, we all experience this, especially on things like social media or any other internet-based thing, the TV. And it really is interesting to me. It's interesting to me because I am the producer and director of a podcast that is all about interpersonal relationships. And this type of interaction fascinates me, where we are raising our children in a culture where everybody is offended by everything, and yet the way to live an authentic and aligned life, that life that we think that we're looking for by going down that road, is completely over here, where we say we don't need anybody to do the thing, be the thing, say the thing, or have the thing for me to be me. Right? And I joke with people sometimes. So for those of you who don't know, I'm left-handed. And I feel like that's really kind of like the last horizon. That's like, the last element that hasn't been conquered by the people who are determined to be offended by others around them. Like, I legitimately, this is a total tangent, I legitimately have had this idea for a while where I want to create like a fake uprising of left-handed people and get super offended by our culture who's like, you're all designed for right-handed people. It's offensive to me that our cars are designed for right-handed people. How dare you sell those scissors that aren't ambidextrous? Because that's saying something and you're talking down about me by selling right-handed scissors. If you're listening on audio, I'm smiling. Right? So I have this urge as a like cultural experiment to take this way too seriously and like conquer this last frontier of offendedness. And that's totally besides the point. If any of you want to take it up, there you go. There's the idea. Create the left-handed uprising. See what happens. I bet you'll be very, very popular. They'll probably come out with a ribbon in your name or a puzzle piece. And then people will have pins for you. And maybe even marches or flags. And if you're going to be offended by me on the podcast, just turn it off now. I ain't your cup of tea. So today, we're going to look at that moment when somebody chooses to take you personally. And we know that this is happening now based on past episodes of the podcast. And our ego takes over and we have this instinct to defend ourselves. Okay. Now, we have two words here. We have decide or choose. And when my friend had talked to me about this situation, he's like, well, I decided to do this because of this, and I decided to do this because of this. And I'm telling her all of these things, his family member. I'm telling her all of these things, and she's super upset with me, and I can't explain myself enough, right? So, the word decide. Okay, notice the end of that word, the C-I-D-E, side. Anything that ends in that word means to kill something off. It's a judgment place. Okay, it's a judgment of right or wrong or good or bad. And when we decide something, it means we had these options and we are killing away these things in the name of some judgmental reason to decide to do this. So think of other words that end in that side, like pesticide, homicide, suicide, right? It always has to do with killing something. Same with decide. Okay? When we decide something, we're always doing that out of a place of ego, where we are weighing the pros and cons, we are weighing the judgments, and we are making our decision the best way we think we can based out of rationalizing ourselves into it. All right? And by the way, the people who like say like, oh, make a list of pros and cons, like, don't ever do that. It's ridiculous. It's bad advice. Moving on. So now we look at the word choose. Choose is a whole word. Okay? And when you choose something, it has nothing to do with killing something off or making a judgment call. It just has to do with action. So when you choose something, you choose it because you choose it because you choose it and not because of any other reason. Okay? So do we see the difference between these two things? When you decide something, it's because of this like backpack worth of judgment that you're carrying around with you so that your ego can say, here, look at all the reasons why I did this or why I can justify myself in doing X. Right? Whereas when you choose something, it's a one sentence thing. You choose it because you chose it. And period, done. Okay? So you can always know whether or not you are choosing something or you're deciding something based on your gut reaction. So when you decide something and someone questions you on it or tells you you shouldn't have done that or makes a judgment call about you, you immediately will go into a defensive state. You will often get frustrated and anxious and be very worried about what the other person thinks of you if they're someone that you know well. Right? Choosing, when you make a choice, and it's clean and empty. There's no judgment around it. There's no right or wrong. It just simply is. When someone is offended by it or questions it or tries to make a judgment call about it, your reaction is, meh. Thanks for sharing. I'm smiling if you're listening on audio. And you've heard me say that before on the podcast, that thanks for sharing statement. And that really has become my reaction when people question my choices or feel like they need to say something about my choices. It's like, oh, thanks for sharing. Because here's the reality. In the nicest way possible, like, I care about people so deeply. That's why I do this. That's why I do this work. That's why it's like 9:34 on Wednesday evening and I'm here doing this when I know I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m. tomorrow again to do more of the things, right? So I care about people very, very deeply, and I want everyone listening to this podcast and everyone who doesn't listen to live their most fulfilled and authenticated life. And simultaneously, I really don't give a shit about what you think of me. And when you find that place of loving people because they're people, because you see the Spirit of God inside each and every one of them and how genuine and amazing that is. And you're in that space of freedom where you don't need them to agree with you because you're so grounded in yourself. That, my friends, is the best way to be with people. And am I perfect at this? Absolutely fuck no. No. So don't get it twisted. I'm still human. I still have my moments. My best friend will attest to many times when I'm like, ah! And we all have those people in our life, right? Where we can call and we get the junk out so that we come back to a grounded place So no one's perfect at this, but we can move down the line. We can get better to where our actions are made out of choice, not out of a weighment place of deciding. And then we become grounded in that choice to the point where nobody else needs to think or feel or do a thing for us to be validated in that choice. Right? So this podcast is titled Chocolate Vanilla Choose. Because the first time I heard about this whole concept, I was at an event in Philadelphia. It was that same event. If you listen to the first episode of season 1 of this podcast, it was that event that kind of threw my life into a bit of chaos and had me reorganize a lot of things, which was really great for me because I needed that. We all know that, right? We all know that growth doesn't happen when we're super comfortable, right? So if there are times in your life when you get really uncomfortable and like the shit hits the fan and splatters on your couch, look at it like, oh, hey, it's grow time. It's time to level up, right? In every single video game, you don't get to the next level until you have the boss battle. And according to my 9-year-old son, you gotta beat the dark boss to get to the next level, right? So that event was one of those things for me where it was an opportunity for me to step into that next level. And I knew going through that event that I would have to face a lot of things about myself and overcome a lot, process a lot to beat the dark boss and really step into my journey. But this whole dynamic, this learning about choices and decisions really came out of that place. And they used this example at this event where they pulled someone to the front and they said, chocolate, vanilla, which do you choose? And the person would say chocolate or vanilla. Let's just say they say chocolate. And say, okay, why did you choose chocolate? And more often than not, the person would say like, well, I like chocolate. Nope. Take it back. Okay, chocolate, vanilla. Choose. Chocolate. Okay, why do you choose chocolate? I choose chocolate because everyone in my family likes chocolate. Nope, wrong. Pull it back. Chocolate, vanilla, choose. And eventually, the person on stage in front of everybody most often would get super frustrated and finally get to the place where they say chocolate. And the person asks, okay, why do you choose chocolate? And the answer is, I choose chocolate because I choose chocolate. For no other fucking reason than because you chose it. So think about the choices you make in your life and the way you make them. Do you choose your belief system because of X, Y, and Z reasons, because of good and bad and ugly and right and wrong? Or do you choose your belief system because you choose your belief system? Do you choose your partner or spouse for all of these reasons? Or do you simply choose them because you choose them? If you have a bunch of reasons why you feel like you need to justify yourself, you're making a decision. You're not making a choice. And that decision is being made out of ego instead of out of alignment. Now, of course, can we move what previously was a decision over to being a choice? Yes, absolutely. You know, I went through this process actually with my kids, where it was like, okay, I'm choosing to be a mom because, I want to give my kids a better childhood than I had. I want to give them X, Y, and Z. I want to teach them these things, and I have this responsibility, and blah, 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 blah. All these reasons why I was deciding to be a mom. But when we stripped that all away, it was like, oh no, I can just choose to be my kind of mom because I'm going to choose to be my kind of mom. And if other people don't like the kind of mom that I'm choosing to be, that's okay, because I am 100% okay with the awesome, badass kids that I'm choosing to raise as their mom. Right? Another real life example was a little while ago. I had a friend go through a breakup. And he was really, really torn up about it. And a lot of people around him were asking him, like, well, why? Like, why did that happen? Why did you do this? Like, blah, 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 blah. And I had been giving him a ride home from the bar one night, and he started to kind of go into all of these justification reasons as to why he couldn't be in that relationship anymore. And I looked at him and said, yo, like, the only person who needs to be okay with you is you. You don't need to justify yourself to me. And because I love you like a brother, and you'll know this about the people around you. When the people around you genuinely love you, they don't need to be okay with your choices to be okay with you. I'm going to say that again. You'll know that the people around you genuinely love you from a really authentic and aligned place that is not a codependent place when they don't need to be okay with your choices, where they do not need to be okay with your choices to be okay with you. Now, for all of my devil's advocates out there, that obviously is within the confines of love and freedom. Okay, we've talked about how, the whole good and bad, right and wrong thing. I don't subscribe to that. What I do subscribe to is that I believe that each and every person on the planet is born into a state of love. And love always parallels freedom. And so when we're acting in authentic alignment, we act out of love and freedom. And we don't do things that take away other people's love or other people's freedom. Right? Only hurting people hurt other people. All right? So again, for all you devil's advocates out there, I'm not saying that we all need to be okay with Hitler. I'm not saying that, because he did a lot of things to take away a lot of other people's freedom. Right? So, now, for me, one of the ways that this has always been very interesting is in my personal faith. And it wasn't until I got to the place of choice where I really found freedom. Because for years, I wrestled with, what do I believe? And when I was married, I attended a Christian church. I did the whole thing. I went to Bible study meetings. I did all the things. Women's groups, right? And every time somebody asked me what I believed, like, oh, Joelle, like my friends, my family, people who know me really well asked me, what do you believe in? Do you believe in God? Do you believe in the Bible? What do you believe? And I always choked on answering them because I immediately went to this place of defending myself and explaining away why I believed things that I said I did. Now, fast forward, I've come to realize that when I 100% am in alignment with my own belief system, I really, number one, I don't need anyone else to agree with me. I really don't. Of course, I am happy to share as part of why I love doing this podcast. I am happy to share what I believe and the intricacies of that, and I'm really passionate about doing that. However, if someone isn't interested in hearing that, I have no desire to have that conversation with them. I don't need anybody else to believe what I believe for me to be 100% okay with me. Right? And it's the moment that I made that flip from deciding to choosing, that my alignment immediately fell into place. And you'll feel it. Now if somebody comes to me and says, you need to believe X, or you need to believe Y, or I have people knock on my door, I'll be like, thanks for sharing. Not for me, thanks for sharing. And here's the reality. I'm not doing that from a sarcastic place, because I know that there's plenty of people out there in the world that don't believe what I believe. That they're on their own path and they're choosing to do them. And if that brings them alignment and authenticity and joy, then please go fucking do it. Go do you. Right? Now, ultimately, we would want to get to the place where we're actively choosing everything in our life. We're actively choosing our relationships. We're choosing the things we do. We're choosing the words we say. And we're engaging in that from an action place, not from a reaction place. Right? And when you engage with the world this way, when you engage with yourself this way, it puts you in the position of ultimate responsibility. It is impossible to choose because you choose and to not be responsible for your choices. When you're deciding, you're weighing the options, you're judging yourself, you're judging others, you're justifying right and wrong. And more often than not, we tend to go into a victimhood place. I'll be like, I did this because they did this. That's why I made that decision. And it turns into that horrible spiral of nobody actually taking responsibility for the decisions that were made. Whereas, when you move to this place of choice, you ultimately become responsible for everything in your life. And while that may seem kind of terrifying, it is a place of absolute freedom. In that place, you get to say how everything goes. And yes, you're responsible for it at the end of the day. Yes, if you aren't happy with it, it's your choice then to change it. But thank the gods and goddesses that it's then your choice. And no one else is responsible then for your happiness, your love, your alignment, and your authenticity. Right? And in that moment when my best friend had called me about all this, that is one of the first things I said to him, was that you do not need to explain yourself to anybody. If you're okay with you and you're choosing you because you choose you, then that's that. Now, if you're not okay with it and you're reacting out of a super emotional place or a triggered place or a junky place and stuff's coming out of your mouth, or you're making actions that you might not be proud of, which, trick, anytime you're not proud of something you've done, you're out of alignment and you need to be responsible for that. So that's a clue. If you're not proud of yourself, or you can imagine in the future and cast like, will I be proud of myself if I do X? Like, will I come out of that interaction feeling really good about myself? That's your sign. You're going to feel really good about yourself. That action is in your alignment. You're going to maybe feel really good in a moment when you verbally vomit all over somebody, but then feel really shitty about it about 10 minutes later. That's not the way to go. Okay, but we are all human. We all have those moments where we lose our shit, right? And it's okay. Life happens. Whatever junk is done in words can always be repaired in words, if you're willing to take responsibility, right? So in that situation, if you've been there and you do something that maybe you're not super proud of, you act out of your alignment, okay. The way to remedy that is to choose again. Choose again. You go back to that person, you go back to the situation and say, hey, my relationship with me, if you don't know that person really well, you say, hey, my relationship with me is really important, and I recognize that I acted out of integrity and out of alignment there. I'm sorry. You know, sometimes it's the little things. You might not even know them. Right? If it's somebody who you really care about, you go to them and say, hey, I really care about our relationship, and I recognize that I acted out of an inauthentic place. I'm not proud of that. I want to make that right. So I'm choosing to own that and examine why that came up for me so that I can choose again next time. In the metaphysical text, A Course in Miracles, how it defines a miracle is simply choosing love instead of choosing ego or choosing fear. So choosing to choose authentically instead of choosing to decide. Choosing to be responsible, choosing to point the finger. Right? And so when you choose love and you choose again, that is a miracle. That is you landing authentically and aligned back in yourself. And the more often you do that, the faster it happens. Now, in the interim, you might need to process through some of that emotion that came up for you and release all that junk. And I've got a lot about how to do that and what that looks like in season 1 of the podcast. And we'll probably be circling back to some of that in this season because there's multiple techniques and multiple ways and always more things to talk about. So, on that note, chocolate vanilla. Choose. It was awesome to have all you guys here tonight. Thank you for being with me. As always, I would love to hear from you. You can hit me up on the the.SoL.method Facebook page, which is at the.SoL.methodyoga.com. And the SoL method is spelled the SOL.method. Or you can email me. My email address is joelle@the.SoL.method.com. I hope you guys are having an awesome week. I'll catch you next time.